Okay, so good morning. It's 7 o'clock. Well, it's now 7:01 on Friday the 19th. Again, Happy New Year's to everybody. It is amazing how many people get up so early in the morning on Friday to participate. But I will tell you, it is, as I say every time, it gives me so much energy, and it is such a highlight of my week and of my day. And I'm just thankful for all of you being here. I do hope you all had a fabulous holiday season and that you ended up spending time the way you wanted to spend it. So I appreciate it. I know a lot of people stayed very, very busy. But we have an incredible lineup today. I'm very excited about this. But before we get there, I just have to say thank you to my team. Not my team, it's our team. Because we meet once a week. Some of us meet once a week, some of us meet off and on, but Bisa Martin, who's there, she, is helpful. She keeps me on track. She goes, "Now, Tony, did you do this today?" "I did, Bisa, I did." And then I say, "No, but I'll get it done." And then I have Shirley and Pat, and Pat is our taskmaster. Let me tell you. So Pat Hastings and Shirley Martinez, thank you. And then I have Donna Davidson, who is always there when I call her. So we thank you for being a part of the team. And Karen Marshall, what would we do without our question queen? So the hot seat lady. But I just had to say thank you to all of you for making these happen. I go around the state and people are like, "Well, are you going to continue it if you're not going to run?" I said, I am going to continue, and I'm not going to be a lame duck. I'm going to be here. You're not going to get rid of me if you thought you were, but we are going to continue this on. And this year, what we're going to do is we're going to stay focused on the election. That's why we're starting out with election integrity and the council department at the RNC. One, I want you guys to see what the RNC is doing and how active we are, and the things that we can do to continue on and take them into our community, take them to our clubs, take them to our counties. So many of you, obviously you're the active ones. You are the leaders of the pack. You are the ones that want to make a difference. So let's get on the same page. Let's work together. Let's make a difference in getting Republicans elected. And that's what our goal is. That is what our job is to make that happen. I know we've got challenges out there, but Lord, it just makes us appreciate those good times that we have when we have a few challenges or a lot of challenges. But we can learn from every experience that we have is what we can do. So I want to get started by, as I just said, that we are going to start off with the election and in educating, well, which is what is inform, educate, and taking action. That's what we're all about on this Zoom. And so today we have two incredible people that have come in from the RNC. I've known Christina for a while, but I was listening to her over the weekend, and Bisa sitting next to me. We're down in Edinburgh, and I go, "Bisa, I think we need to have her on our call." She goes, "Yes, let's make that happen." And what did she do? She said yes. And then she brings Steve. It says, "Well, Steve would like to come." I said, "Absolutely, we want him." So, but Christina, she is, let's see, you are officially the Director of Election Integrity for the
Yes,
Republican.
ma'am. Yes,
That's right, the
correct.
RNC. And you guys, I hope you read, I saw there was a click through that you could see her bio, but she has a passion for the party, a passion for elections, that people have the opportunity to have them fair. And that we feel confident that our vote is going to count. And Christina, I was reading through your resume, and I'm thinking, wow, the chairman of the College Republican. You were on the 40 to 40. Every list, I think that was 40 under 40. You were there doing it. And boy, am I so excited that you were definitely part of the RNC and that you're here to share your information with our group today. And then Steve, I'm going to talk about you in a few minutes too. Is that an impressive resume also? So ladies and gentlemen, we are pretty lucky to have these two people with us today and to share the information about election integrity, because that's what we're working on, is to get this election correct and to go forward and to have our vote count and to get that vote out and get Republicans elected. So Christina, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take your time here and share. And then the questions will be asked at the end. Whoops. Oh, there you go. She has a slide presentation. So
Yeah.
at the end, I will be having Karen for both of you and Steve will be putting the questions together. Okay. So
Great,
go for it.
fantastic. Well, thank you, Tony Ann, for that glowing introduction. I truly appreciate it. And I know that I'm sure I speak for everyone on this call with just how grateful we are for your leadership. So really excited to be here today. I am going to dive right into it, and then Steve will actually expound more. He is our litigation counsel with the RNC, and he'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into some of the lawsuits that we're engaged in. I'm going to give you an overview of the whole election integrity department and our program and our operation throughout the states. So I'd like to start off with just emphasizing, I'm sure that we all agree here, but the importance of election integrity, because at the end of the day, we want the results to accurately reflect the will of the voters. And to that end, the RNC's whole mission is to strengthen our voters' confidence, to make elections fair and secure and transparent. So at the heart of our mission are our volunteers, and we'll dive into that in a minute, but those are our poll watchers and our poll workers. And the way that our program runs is we'll have observers on the ground at polling sites, at ballot tabulation centers, and they will call in with questions, concerns, issues, problems to our election day headquarters run by the Republican Party, partnered between the RNC and the state party and the campaigns. So they call in to report those issues, and the RNC and our partners then provide what I like to say rapid response services to ensure that the questions are answered and that the issues are resolved. So thankfully to Tony Ann and many of our other members and the chairwoman, election integrity has become a top priority for the committee. And I do have some good news. We have found that there is a direct link between voter confidence and voter turnout, right? I think all of us know that. We've witnessed it before. For instance, I was in Georgia during the runoff in 2020 for the U.S. Senate. And unfortunately, what we saw was there were so many people that were skeptical if their vote would count that no matter how many times we knocked on their doors, they were really resistant to casting their ballot. Well, fast forward to 2022, in Georgia, after they strengthened their election laws on the books, right, they went back to the drawing board and the state legislature reformed many of these laws. The RNC had a program in the state with observers on the ground, ensuring transparency. As we like to say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And we believe that because of all of this, we witnessed that in the primary alone, which is when Georgia held their first elections after passing these reforms, that early voting actually tripled from the previous cycle. So we know that our program has been successful, partnered alongside so many fantastic grassroots organizations and Republican state legislatures. I'll just touch on this quickly, but so that everyone is aware, across 50 different states, there are 50 different sets of rules and regulations. So there's not one, ordained federal regulator up in DC dictating all the laws in the states. But because of this, that means that we have to navigate each state with a unique approach. And I get asked all the time, what does election integrity mean to you? What does it look like? Well, this is the lens that we typically view states through. So if they have these measures in place, what I like to call protection policies, it means that their election is more likely to be safeguarded. So things like photo ID, maintaining accurate voter rolls, opting in to vote by mail, of course, and certainly having verification standards for mail-in ballots. So whether that is, signature verification or part of your driver's license or Social Security. I know that we're currently engaged in litigation on this issue, specifically in Texas, and Steve can talk about that in a minute. Now, if a state has these measures in place, it means that we just have to navigate the state and show it a little bit more attention. That would be things that we don't like to see, right? Illegal ballot harvesting, unsecured drop boxes, ranked choice voting, automatic voter registration. All of these things combined really do a disservice to the integrity of an election. So the history of EI operations, for about 40 years, the RNC's hands were actually tied when it came to activities like poll watching. Back in the 1980s, there was a gubernatorial race in New Jersey, and the DNC claimed that that our party was engaged in activities that violated the National Voting Rights Act. The RNC never admitted to any wrongdoing, but we did agree to a consent decree. So fast forward to 2019, that restriction was finally lifted. But prior to that time, really it was on either the state parties or individual campaigns to run their own EI operation on the ground. So 2020, we all know that there were a wide array of issues and problems that arose from Democrats really exploiting the pandemic, right? We saw laws turned on their heads, whether it was the courts or Secretary of States, essentially unilaterally deciding that we know what the law says, however, we are issuing guidance in conflict with that. And it created a lot of chaos and confusion. So I won't spend too much time to stay on time. We all are aware of the issues from 2020, but I think that opened a lot of people's eyes to the importance of really investing into election integrity. And so we're so grateful to Chairwoman McDaniel for really taking the lead here. And in 2022, it was the first time that the RNC formed its own program, and it was fantastic. Donna was a part of it. We're so grateful to have her in Texas. So we had a presence throughout multiple states, and the difference between 2022, excuse my cat, the difference between 2022 and right now is that all of the staff were really housed underneath different departments. So we had folks working under political, under legal, under comms, and the great news today is that it's all housed underneath one house, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I wanted to recognize that the RNC has also established a committee on election integrity that our members sit on. It's chaired by Ashley McClay in DC. They've issued 2 reports that are very fantastic, a thorough analysis of what an election integrity operation should look like, best practices for states. So I would encourage everyone here, if you're interested in taking a deep dive, to review those reports. So as I mentioned, we now, the RNC, have our own dedicated department to EI, and it is a joint funded effort between the NRSC and the NRCC. So we're really able to tackle all of these important issues under a unified front. As I mentioned earlier, there really is a direct link between voter confidence and voter turnout. There's also a direct link between our Bank Your Vote initiative and the Protect Your Vote initiative. Many of you may be familiar with this. The Bank Your Vote initiative is encouraging our voters to cast their votes early, whether by mail or in person. And we know that in order for people to feel confident to vote by mail, that they must know that their ballot is going to count, that it's going to be protected. So the department falls under what I like to call a 4-prong approach. That's political, legal, communications, and data. This is what our structure looks like at headquarters right now. We have our wonderful senior advisor, Josh Helton. I serve as the department director. We have 3 full-time attorneys dedicated to election integrity efforts. We have a deputy on staff and a communications director. Within the states, we actually have staff in 11 states right now, and I'll give you a little bit more of a preview of what that looks like. But going back to our 4-prong approach, so political, that entails the volunteer operation. So those are the recruitment, training, and shifting of poll watchers and poll workers. 2 is legal, executing a proactive legal strategy, and that looks like not only not only proactively, like I said, going after issues that need to be addressed, but we also will intervene and defend Republican state legislatures, Republican state governors when they pass sound election integrity laws and Elias or the DOJ comes by to attack them. So 3 is communications. This goes back to the important issue of strengthening the confidence of our party's base. So we want to ensure that they know that they can vote and that that vote will be cast. Therefore, anytime that there is a win that the RNC EI department achieves, or there's a success by one of our partners or grassroots coalitions, we want to ensure that we are amplifying that message. And then 4 is data. So we are taking a look at what role the RNC can play in ensuring that voter lists are accurate. And I'll go into that a little bit further. So the program started off strong back in July. That's when I came on board with the RNC. We had a presence in many states that held elections last year, including Louisiana, Kentucky, and Mississippi. It was the first time Louisiana actually ever set up an election integrity operation, and we were there to provide that support. 2 states, believe it or not, have deadlines a year out to submit names for individuals to work as poll workers. And that includes North Carolina and Wisconsin. In North Carolina, we actually tripled the number of Republican poll worker names that were submitted from last cycle. And in Wisconsin, we submitted the highest names that have ever been. So we're really, really proud of that. And something else that the committee has been working on is a toolkit for state parties. And, many states may not fall underneath the category of being a presidential battleground. And because of that, they aren't necessarily provided, like staff on the ground. However, we do want to be a resource. And so we actually put together a very comprehensive blueprint of how to set up and run an election integrity operation in the states. And that will be released likely in February. So the staffing infrastructure, these are the states where we have staff now. So we have election integrity state directors. Many of them already have deputies. We'll be building out the team similar to the field operation, where there will also be regionals on the ground. And partnered alongside our staff are actually retained counsel. I have exciting news that Texas is now on the map, and I see that big smile on Tony Ann's face. And so we will soon be hiring staff in Texas to focus solely on election integrity operations, and we're hoping to get that ball rolling shortly. So preparing the program, we actually had students fly into DC, and we had a 3-day college where we trained them on this whole list of issues that you see here. They also had to put together homework plans and presentations, and most of them were successful, but it was really, really important to us to prepare and equip our staff and not just to throw them into the fire. So from there, this is an example of something that they've been working on. I like to call this our state election law profile. And it's a list of over 100 questions. I couldn't even fit it all here on the screen, but these dive into the law, and it creates a full picture of the strengths and vulnerabilities of that state's elections. So these are some of the things that our staff are currently working on. We're monitoring any type of election administration rule changes. So whether that comes in the form of legislation or guidance issued by the secretaries of state or county ordinances, we actually are monitoring these rulemakings and going through them with a fine-tooth comb, comparing what the secretaries are instructing their county election offices to do against what the statute allows. And in any instance where there's a conflict, we are actually sending in letters, demand letters, reminding the secretaries of the proper procedure in the state. So these are all things that we are keeping our eye on. And then our staff on the ground are engaging with stakeholders. So everyone from grassroots coalition leaders to, of course, the county parties, campaigns, elected officials, And yes, we are already in communications with election administrative offices. This is especially important because we want to establish a positive, good rapport with the clerks, with the supervisors of elections. So come election season, we're able to pick up that phone and have a direct line of communication to them. So recruiting, this is the volunteer side that I noted. We are actively identifying volunteers, good American citizens that are willing to raise their hand and say, I would love to serve as an observer or work as a poll worker. This month alone in January, we're really kicking off the election year strong. We have 45 election integrity training scheduled just this month alone. Less than a week away, next Thursday, January 25th, is our national day of training. And every single state on that list that you saw earlier, all of our presidential battleground states, the states that are on the map for the congressional committee and senatorial committee, we will be hosting EI trainings in those states. So we're really excited to be starting the year off strong. And certainly, you know, the RNC, we cannot do this alone, right? We are thrilled to be able to partner alongside the state parties, alongside grassroots coalition groups that are concerned about election integrity, and we're thrilled to have those partnerships. So this is an example of one of our registration pages. You'll be seeing this come to Texas soon, and you'll note here that we are also recruiting for the primary. We're asking if they're willing to serve as an observer during the presidential preference. And then in those states where there are separate state primaries, we're offering the option to be a worker or a watcher. And then we're also identifying individuals who are attorneys because they play a very special role when it comes to election integrity operations. And this is something that I'm very excited about. We hope to launch this in the next month. But in addition to just a sign up page, we're actually creating these state election integrity info hubs, and it'll be the one-stop shop for everything you need to know about EI in the state. You'll be able to report issues. So whether you're a volunteer or a voter or just, you know, a concerned citizen who wants to alert the RNC to an issue on the ground, you'll be able to do that here. We'll be listing out all of our upcoming trainings. We'll have a whole Q&A section on your state's election laws, and we'll be providing all of the preparation and materials for the volunteers that are serving as poll watchers. And then for the sake of time, I won't spend a lot of effort explaining you know, recruiting volunteers. I'm sure you guys are well familiar with that, but our staff have been trained to not only do digital recruitment, but of course, in-person recruitment. So for those who may not know the difference, there are the poll workers and poll watchers, as I've mentioned. The workers, this is, of course, it's an official government role. So they're the ones that are on the other side of the desk when you walk in to vote. They are greeting you. They're checking you in on the poll book. They're guiding you over to the voting machines. They're the ones that are responsible for running and administering the election. The reason that this is important is because as key as poll watchers are and observing and documenting, the advantage with workers is that they are the decision makers, right? So they not only can see a problem, but they can correct it. And that's why it's important to have really good people who are well-versed in the state's election procedures, running our elections and helping America vote. Poll watchers, this is usually a party credentialed volunteer role, and they are the ones that we have recruited, again, not only at the polling sites where in-person voting takes place, but at the ballot tabulation centers or the central counts. They have different names in different states, but it's where the processing and tabulation happens of thousands and tens of thousands of ballots. So it's especially important to have transparency there. These are the areas that typically every state will allow observation for. That's logic and accuracy testing of the machines. So whether that's the tabulators or the e-poll books, we will have eyes on that process. Certainly polling sites during early voting, election day, the tabulation centers, as I mentioned. And at the tabulation centers, there's a lot that goes into processing a ballot. And we're going to make sure that we'll have eyes on the complete life of that ballot at these central counts. And that also includes things like duplication and adjudication. And then, of course, the post-election process. So whether that be canvass audits or potential recounts, our program, I'll go through this really quickly. Essentially, it falls into the 3 buckets of recruiting, training, and shifting. We will be doing test runs during the primaries, meaning that we'll have observers on the ground in an active war room. We will reassess after the primary in each of our target states to determine what worked well, what needed improvement, what were the issues that we saw on the ground that we need to address before the general. And then here is a list of criteria that we like to reference when determining where the priority polling sites are. So certainly if they have a history of problems or issues, we want to ensure that we have coverage there with our observers. And then what are the things that they look out for? Well, in most states, this is what we train our volunteers on. Certainly lack of meaningful access, prohibited electioneering, machine malfunctions, intimidation, an election worker failing to follow the proper procedures, violation of poll worker parity. We've seen this happen in states before. Sometimes it could be just the confusion of the election officials not realizing that it is necessary to have a Republican and a Democrat present when duplicating ballots. So thankfully, because we've had observers on the ground, we've actually been able to catch instances like this and correct it. Shortage of ballots and long lines, people voting past closure. Certainly that is something that we would address immediately. So these are the things that we like to monitor and that we instruct our observers to be paying close attention to. I mentioned this at the beginning of the call. We have our first responders who are our volunteer Republican attorneys, and they play a very unique role. I'll go over some of the other responsibilities that they partake in during the election process. But in our, what we like to call war room or election day headquarters, it is the command center where attorneys are going to be fielding all incoming questions and concerns from the field. And then the lawyers will guide the poll watchers through the appropriate election code and provide resolution, answer questions, or when necessary, escalate the issue through the proper chain of command in the election administrative process. So the first step is usually to call the county elections office. If we need to escalate it to the Secretary of State, we will. And then, of course, there are instances where we have to litigate. And I'll also note that there are multiple ways to report in a problem. Not only is it the traditional, pick up the phone and call the hotline. We allow texting now. You can email in issues. We have an online reporting form that is shown here on the screen. So we want to make sure that all channels of communication are accessible for volunteers and voters during election season. And our hotlines go live before early voting even starts. So the minute that absentee ballots are mailed out, we're going to make sure that we are on the front lines being able to address all these issues. And on the data front, we have actually sent out multiple letters to states notifying them that they are seemingly could be in violation of the NVRA's requirements for voter list maintenance. We've actually found in states like Michigan and Nevada that they have counties that had more people on the voter rolls than actually living there, according to the U.S. Census. So we are keeping a close eye on voter lists and any avenue that we can engage in to encourage secretaries to be keeping these lists accurate, we're going to engage in. And communications, again, it comes down to amplifying our partners and our own successes, ultimately with the goal to increase voter confidence. We want to get the message out that the RNC partnered alongside the state parties, partnered alongside our grassroots coalitions, that we are ensuring transparent elections and doing everything we can to also promote accuracy. And these are some of our great headlines. We've actually had over 50 news articles placed in the last 5 months. And then for volunteer attorney roles, we have roving legal. That's one of those what I like to call super poll watchers. They essentially have the ability to stop into different precincts throughout the day, legal liaisons at county election offices, election day litigators, and then war room legal that I shared earlier. For our retained state EI councils, and actually this slide can be updated now. I think we're involved in 75 lawsuits as of a few days ago. But these are some of the responsibilities that we give them. So it's not just simply filing a lawsuit. That usually is, the last resort. We try to resolve these issues outside the courtroom as much as we can. And the EI councils are on the ground to help with those efforts. So I'm not going to steal Steve's thunder, but these are some of the issues that the RNC has engaged in litigation. We're always going to fight for voter ID, poll worker parity, access for our observers. And again, I'll let Steve speak on this, but we have been engaged in Texas and will continue fighting that good fight. And then for building the EI program, this is something that I like to share with states that are interested in doing this on their own. This kind of reflects that blueprint to success, that toolkit that the RNC has created. But I encourage everyone, if you're interested in getting involved in election integrity and making a difference, really the first step is learning the laws of your state, forming these relationships with not only the grassroots and county chairs, but your election administrators, having a full understanding of the election calendar, familiarizing yourself with the procedures. Sometimes what is written on paper and statute, the way that it's played out in practice can look a little bit different. And then establishing clarity on the chain of command for which government entity can correct a wrong. So if we find out that a precinct manager may not be abiding by procedures, do we have confidence that if we call the county elections office, that they'll be able to then provide instruction to the manager? And then organizing. So this is the operational side, identifying your high priority polling locations, like I mentioned earlier, determining the areas that you want to have observation at, the machine testing, the voting, the tabulation, executing and establishing your recruitment goals, and then conducting training and shifting volunteers. And then finally, of course, is monitoring. So once you have a full understanding of your state's electoral process, you've recruited and trained your volunteers, then you want to be monitoring the election process. So as issues and questions come into headquarters, you also want to be aware of the activity of your election offices. And in states that have banned Zuck bucks or the private funding of elections, if you get word that your county may be partnering with some of these outside groups, that would be something to flag. And then this is something that we saw actually arise in Nevada previously, where we got word that the clerk was planning on closing polling sites in, typically Republican areas and opening more in Democrat areas. I mean, these are things that you just want to be monitoring throughout the cycle. And where we have staff and a presence in the states, I just want to reassure everyone that the RNC is partaking in all of these activities. So that is an overview of our program, and I'm happy to take any questions and share my contact information at the end of the call. Thank you, Tony Ann.
Wow, that is just filled with so much, and that gives people an idea of what the RNC is doing, but what they can do to help make us have great elections. So and drive them. I was going to ask you about the website. What you had a website? Is it active for the election integrity? Is that one, or is that going to become active?
Yeah, so Texas will be active in the next week. So the volunteer registration page, we'll have that active in the next week. So that way we can start, everyone on here is welcome to start spreading that far and wide. We'd love to be able to recruit as many volunteers as possible. So we'll get that active. And then the election integrity, like information hub site, that'll probably be a few more weeks, but we're working on it alongside our digital team.
Well, as soon as that's up, then we'll be sharing it. We can push it out in many different ways. So that'll be super. Okay. Wow.
Great.
So hold on, because you've got a lot of questions. I saw them coming through. So anyway, well, let's move on to Steve Kinney, who is the senior counsel for litigation at the RNC. Steve, in fact, I even responded back to your resume, and I'm like going, oh my gosh, let's see. He graduated from Georgetown and from Harvard Law School. I'm like, wow, RNC is like so blessed to have you. I mean, your knowledge, and you worked with Senator Grassley. Have you gotten a report on him? Because I think I saw that he'd just been hospitalized. Is he doing okay?
Last I heard, he was out of the hospital.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear
Yeah.
that.
He'll be
So
back.
you have had an incredible, well-rounded experience. So we are very lucky to have you come into our work with the RNC, and that you are out there in all those states. Do you help put out that weekly what is it called? The lawsuit update I think is what it's called.
Yes, we track a lot of the lawsuits that are going on in the election integrity space, including a lot of which the RNC is involved in. So yeah, our office sends that out on a weekly basis.
It's pretty incredible. I share it in my TAD Talks. I put out a weekly newsletter, and I put that in about once every couple weeks or 3 weeks. So because a lot of people are so interested, and that's why I'm excited for you to be able to share your portion of this call today, because they do want to know what is going on and what is the RNC doing and how active we are. As Christina just said, 75 lawsuits. So if you could you can share your slides, and let's go ahead and get going. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Absolutely. And thank you for that kind introduction. Let me try and get my PowerPoint here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for that introduction. My name is Steve Kenny, Senior Counsel for litigation here at the RNC. Obviously, litigation is a critical part of our election integrity efforts. And as Christina mentioned, we've been involved in 75 cases across the country in 21 states, well ahead of the pace from the previous cycle, and I think by the end of this cycle will be probably our busiest litigation year yet. What I'll do is I'll go through some of our most significant cases that we have going on right now, and give you an update. This first category of cases, election integrity legislation, this is probably the most substantial part of our docket. In the last few years, a lot of states have passed significant election integrity legislation in the wake of the 2020 election. And perhaps predictably, left-wing groups, Democratic groups, often led by their lawyer, Mark Elias, have filed suit against many of them, trying to get courts to overturn or enjoin them. But we get involved in a lot of those oops, sorry, I think I pressed the wrong button here. Sorry. Yeah, so we try to get involved in a lot of those cases, and we've had some significant wins. The first case listed here is League of Women Voters versus Lee. That involved a challenge to Florida's Senate Bill 90 that was passed as probably one of the first election integrity laws passed after 2020. Impose important regulations around the use of drop boxes and on third-party voter registration activities. Plaintiffs sued, and they got a very good liberal judge for them in the Northern District of Florida, who shortly before the 2022 election tried to enjoin a lot of those provisions. But we appealed to the 11th Circuit along with the state, and we got almost a complete victory there. 11th Circuit upheld almost the entirety of SB 90 and left only a few claims to be decided by the district court, which are currently pending. But we're pretty confident that that will prevail on those. If not in the district court, then in the 11th Circuit. This next case involves actually a group of cases. There's about at least 10 cases challenging Georgia's Senate Bill 202 that we're involved in. But this is the law that you're probably familiar with. Joe Biden called it Jim Crow 2.0. The Major League Baseball moved their All-Star game out of Atlanta in protest of the law. But the 2022 election happened with the law fully in effect, and turnout was high, and there was no evidence of any disenfranchisement, which you would think would severely undermine their case. But this case has been going on for a long time. We haven't even had trial yet. But over the last few years, plaintiffs have filed a lot of preliminary injunction motions against various provisions of the law, and we've won most of them, including a fairly significant one filed by Biden's Department of Justice, alleging that many of the provisions need to be struck down because the legislature was allegedly motivated by racially discriminatory motives. The judge denied that motion and rejected the claim on the merits. So we think that is a good sign for when the judge finally decides that issue fully. And we're pretty confident that we have a pretty good judge there, and the 11th Circuit. We think that by the time the 2024 election rolls around, this law will fully be in effect. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this next one, Lupe versus Abbott, which is a challenge to Texas Senate Bill 1. I believe about 6 consolidated cases in that one, including one from the Department of Justice. One of the most important parts of this case was the precedent that was set on the right to intervene. So the RNC, along with NRSC, NRCC, and the Harris County and Dallas County Republican parties moved to intervene early on in the case, and the district court judge rejected that motion. We took appeal to the Fifth Circuit. Fifth Circuit reversed, holding that political parties generally have a right to intervene under the federal rules in election law challenges. Obviously, parties have unique interests in those laws. Their candidates compete under those rules. Their voters vote under those rules. And that set important precedent, not just in this case and in the Fifth Circuit, but it's actually the first time that a circuit court held that the federal rules of civil procedure can guarantee a political party the right to intervene. So we were very pleased with that outcome, and it's something that we can cite in a lot of these cases around the country. Just a couple months ago, the district court judge, and this is Judge Rodriguez in the Western District of Texas, he issued a decision holding that the SB 1's laws requiring a driver's license or last 4 digits of Social Security number on absentee ballot envelopes or absentee ballot applications. He held that violates the materiality provision of federal law, which I'll discuss that provision in a little more detail later. But we and the state immediately appealed that decision to the Fifth Circuit, and we filed a motion for a stay pending appeal, which the Fifth Circuit granted us. So what that means is that the law remains in effect as litigation continues, but also that the panel in reaching that decision held that we were likely to succeed on the merits of the claim. So we consider that a very good sign about how the Fifth Circuit looks at the claim, and is hopefully a good omen for how it'll eventually be resolved there. But otherwise, trial completed on the numerous other claims involved in the case, and we expect a decision probably the next few months, hopefully well in advance of the 2024 election. And again, even if I'm not confident in how the district court might decide a lot of these claims, I think I'm very confident that the Fifth Circuit will see it the right way. This next case is the DNC versus North Carolina State Board of Elections. This is one of our more recent cases that we've gotten involved in. The North Carolina General Assembly passed Senate Bill 747, a major election integrity law that they've been working on for a long time. They mustered the votes to override the governor's veto there. And immediately, several lawsuits from different groups of plaintiffs were filed, mostly challenging the law's same-day voter registration procedures and safeguards. but also challenging the new requirement that absentee ballots have to actually be returned by election day as opposed to the days and weeks following it, as well as some the law's enhanced protections for poll watchers. So that case is in its infancy, but we've been granted intervention. We're currently briefing some preliminary injunction motions that have been filed there. Montana Perd versus Jacobson is a challenge to Montana's HB 892. That law prohibits being registered in more than one location, which is obviously meant to deter double voting, which is illegal. We actually just found out last night that we were granted intervention in that case, which is great. And so we're going to be litigating again a preliminary injunction motion in that case. Another category of cases that we have been particularly active in recent years is in the troubling trend of non-citizen voting. So this first case listed here, Fasella versus Adams, we're the plaintiffs. We initiated this litigation. It's a challenge to a New York City ordinance that allows for non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. The state trial court agreed with us, concluding that that ordinance violates governing New York state law. The city has appealed. Arguments were held last summer in the appellate division, and now we're just waiting a decision from that court. This next case is Ma Familia Vota versus Fontes. I think it's perhaps one of our most significant cases that we have going on right now in Arizona. This involves a challenge to several provisions of election law, but probably the most significant one being the state law requirement that an individual voter provide documentary proof of citizenship in order to be eligible to cast a ballot by mail. The district court held that the Federal National Voter Registration Act preempts the documentary proof of citizenship requirement and therefore can't be enforced. We disagree with that decision strongly. The NVRA, as the name implies, is meant to govern voter registration. It's not meant to govern the criteria or eligibility to vote and cast a ballot by mail. So trial just completed in the case. Once the remaining claims have been decided, we're certainly going to appeal to the Ninth Circuit, and I see this case as going to the Supreme Court because of the importance and the novelty of the issues presented. I think this case is actually also a good example of the importance and value that the RNC can provide in intervening to defend these cases. The Attorney General of Arizona that's defending the case is now a partisan Democrat and has not been putting forward a vigorous defense of the law. And so luckily, we have some really good lawyers representing us there. They've built a very strong record, have mounted a vigorous defense of the law in court, and then they'll be able to take the lead on an appeal to the Ninth Circuit. So again, I think it's very important that we are in that case to defend this important election integrity law. And of course, we're always monitoring developments in states and municipalities that might be considering allowing non-citizens to vote. We're looking at Vermont municipalities currently, excuse me, which many of which allow for non-citizens to vote in school board elections. And so where we think it might be worth deploying resources to challenge these laws, well, that's what we'll do. The RNC also goes to court where appropriate to defend the rights of poll watchers and to enforce parity requirements for hiring poll workers. One case that we had a recent win is DeVisser versus Benson. This is another case that we brought as a plaintiff. We challenged guidance issued by the Michigan Secretary of State that restricted the rights of poll watchers and what they could do in a polling place. And we won on all issues in the trial court. Court held that the Secretary of State exceeded her lawful authority, and the guidance was inconsistent with the statutory law. And then the Michigan Court of Appeals just a couple months ago unanimously affirmed that decision. So this case is still going on. The state's appealing to the Michigan Supreme Court, but so far we're 2-0 in that case, and hopefully the streak continues. Delory versus Jeffries in Wisconsin. So when we received word that the city of Green Bay was denying access to poll watchers at certain early voting locations before the 2022 elections, we immediately went to court and obtained a temporary restraining order allowing our people to have access. And then as the case continued over this past summer, the court agreed to extend that into a permanent injunction, and now the city of Green Bay is prohibited from denying poll watchers access to early voting sites going forward in 2024. The Deese case versus North Carolina State Board of Elections. This was a challenge to a poll watcher regulation that limited political parties' rights to appoint poll watchers and to substitute them out during the course of the day. Court agreed with us and joined that regulation. Case was held in abeyance for a little while. We just voluntarily dismissed it in the wake of the passage of Senate Bill 747, which clarified some of the laws at issue there and mooted our claim. So those rights are now protected in law. And then we also last cycle sued Maricopa County in Arizona and Clark County in Nevada when there was evidence that they were not hiring a sufficient number of Republican poll workers to comply with poll worker parity requirements. Received some relief from the court there, and particularly in Clark County, the county agreed to provide us rolling updates on hiring in the period leading up to the election, so that we could verify that enough Republicans were being staffed at polling sites. The materiality provision, which I mentioned it before in connection with the Texas SB1 case, but it's become a preferred source of claims by the left in federal court. It's an old provision from the Civil Rights Act from the 1960s. It's phrased very broadly, but in recent years, the left has decided to take that broad language and to try to attack very common sense absentee voting safeguards. But in essence, the materiality provision prohibits denying the right to vote based on errors or omissions on forms that are immaterial to assessing voter qualifications. So their theory is that a lot of absentee voting rules are simply not relevant to assessing voter qualifications, and then therefore not counting an absentee ballot because they haven't been complied with is denying the right to vote. We disagree with that reading. We don't think it's a denial of the right to vote if you're not following basic election procedures. We also think that this provision applies only at the voter registration stage because it's concerned with qualifications and right to vote, and whether you can appear on the voting rolls. And also, as a matter of fact, we think that a lot of these challenge provisions are material to assessing a voter's right to vote and qualification to vote. In the Texas case, I think is a good example. The law requires driver's license numbers or last four of Social Security numbers on absentee ballot applications and envelopes. And that's relevant to determining whether the person is who they say they are and are therefore a qualified registered voter in Texas. So we think we have a lot of arguments on our side. There's been mixed success in the courts on this for us. We did have a big win in Florida where the court upheld a wet signature requirement for voter registration applications, saying that did not violate materiality provision. But we have that negative decision in Texas and one in Pennsylvania regarding their requirement to provide dated signatures on absentee ballots. But currently, the 11th Circuit, the 3rd Circuit, and the 5th Circuit all have materiality provision cases in front of them. Fully briefed in the 3rd Circuit, probably briefing in 5th Circuit in Texas is coming next. Hopefully we get some wins out of those cases, but at the end of the day, I think like this issue is important enough and has caused enough disagreement among the lower courts that the Supreme Court's going to have to step in to resolve it. And hopefully that happens for the 2024 election and not in the heat of it. So we're hopeful that will be taken by the Supreme Court in the next few months.
So Steve, can you wrap this up here? Because we're getting close to the end and I want a couple questions if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
Yep, no, absolutely. I'm almost done. Got
Okay,
2 more slides and I'll get through them real quick. But yeah, absentee voting, another important issue that's been obviously expanded over the last few cycles. We filed a proactive lawsuit as plaintiffs in New York, challenging their recent no excuse absentee voting law. It's very clear the New York Constitution allows absentee voting only in certain circumstances, and it can't be done no excuse by just any individual. And in fact, New York voters specifically rejected a constitutional amendment that would have allowed no excuse absentee voting just 2 years ago. Our motions for preliminary injunction in that case have been denied. We're trying to get a decision before the George Santos special election on Long Island. But we have appealed that. Summary judgment motions fully briefed, so hopefully we can get a decision there soon. We had a big win in Wisconsin. A court threw out guidance that basically allowed an absentee voter who'd already cast a ballot to show up at the clerk's office, get their ballot, and re-vote. The court agreed with us that guidance was inconsistent with statutes. And then a lot of the cases I mentioned previously involve absentee voting regulations. And we have a couple more cases in Georgia and Ohio in development that will be defending ballot harvesting restrictions and absentee voting application deadlines. And finally, I'm sure you've all been following the 14th Amendment litigation, efforts to disqualify President Trump under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court just accepted the case out of Colorado when the Colorado Supreme Court said that Trump was ineligible. The RNC has been providing amicus briefs supporting the president's position, most recently just yesterday in the U.S. Supreme Court, but also in Maine, Colorado, Michigan, Minnesota. And our arguments, the Trump campaign has a lot of arguments, and we're focused on just a handful. But that essentially Section 3 disqualification is not meant to be done by state courts or state officials. It's supposed to be enforced by Congress. And second, Section 3 simply by its terms doesn't apply to former presidents. Former president is not an official that's listed among the offices that it's covered by. So yeah, that's the litigation we got going on right now. Happy to take any questions.
Well, there is a lot of great information. I think it's very eye-opening to know that you guys are out there doing what you're doing, and so appreciative of that. I mean, we are down to the wire here, but so I'm hoping that many of you will stay on if you can for an extra 5 minutes so that Karen can ask a couple questions, because I can see we've got a lot of questions in there, and I've tried, as she does such a great job of consolidating and taking the hot topics there, Karen. So put them on the hot seat if you wouldn't mind, please.
All right, you two, welcome to the hot seat speed round. Christina, there have been many questions posted about paper ballots. What is the RNC's stance on paper ballots?
What I'll say is we believe that having some type of auditable paper trail is always beneficial. Certainly many states do have that. I know that in Texas, there is a paper trail. So whether you are going into a precinct and voting, a hard paper ballot, or going to a touchscreen, which then prints out your ballot that you feed into the tabulator, having some type of paper component to voting is always beneficial to the integrity of the process. because after election day, we are able to go back and audit that election. So that being said, there are some states that don't necessarily have paper components. And we do respect, each state's position and their state legislature's decision making. However, certainly having a paper component is going to be benefit the election integrity of the process. So I'm glad to see that in Texas. I think that every single county does have at least some paper component, even the ones with the touch screens. And I'll also note that a lot of times the concerns around paper ballots are stemmed from the machines. And something else that's great to see is there are secretaries across the country that have actually provided guidance, or the legislatures have passed laws that prohibit voting machines from even connecting to the internet. And then in addition to that, many of these machines are so old essentially that they don't have Wi-Fi capability if they wanted to. So certainly, the voting machines, they should not be connected to the internet, and having a paper component is essential to a thorough audit of the election.
And another combo question regarding Bank the Vote. Can you measure the results that it has had so far? And why encourage early voting? Why not encourage people to get to the polls on election day?
Well, the great thing with early voting is you actually can go to a physical site. In many of these states, they have polling sites during the early voting period. And so you can vote in person, just like election day. But also I want to say, and I don't necessarily quote me on this, but it was maybe upwards of like 5 million votes that Trump got in Texas prior to election day back in 2020. And you really don't want to be walking into election day at a disadvantage against your Democrat opponent, right? And we all know that traditionally, Democrats had a higher rate of voting by mail than Republicans. And so we ultimately want to be winning elections for Republicans and supporting our candidates. And as long as the process is safe and secure, which is what we are working on, which is what I can really commend Texas and your governor and state legislature for reforming and fine-tuning your laws so that Texans can have confidence that they can vote early by mail or in person.
Steve, there have been many questions about voting machines. Why are we not allowed to inspect the code in election machines? And can we still retain confidence in the results provided?
I can't say I'm totally familiar with the rules governing voting machines and testing. I can say that a lot of states do offer that opportunity. And that in the states that do not, or in states that the laws are on the books, but the opportunities are just ignored, that's been a basis for elevating that issue to Secretary of State's office, local election officials, and eventually, potentially court action if the individual's legal rights are not being respected.
And I'll compliment Steve's comment there that so it's called logic and accuracy testing, and in nearly every single state there is a process where it's open to public observation. So in Texas, I believe it's 2 rounds of testing that the machines go through. One is internal with the election administrative staff, and then the second is open to the public. And so I would encourage anyone who is interested in, being a part of that process to go and observe for yourself. Certainly, this is an issue that is important to Texas, considering the machine malfunctions that happened in Harris County last cycle and in several other counties. And so I think that that's a great question. It is important that we're paying attention to the equipment.
And Steve, are there legal protections for poll watchers?
Yes. In fact, in this Texas SB1 litigation, the Texas legislature provided enhanced protections for poll watcher access and limited the rights of poll workers and election officials to interfere with their ability to observe the election process at all stages. It's definitely a state-by-state question. I think, you know, it's a good trend that poll watcher protections have been enhanced in a lot of states, and I think, you know, we need to keep pushing legislatures to provide for those, and then they become a subject of litigation, usually attacked by the left as essentially saying this is going to cause increased harassment. Luckily, they have not had much traction on those types of claims, especially because, you know, they brought facial challenges to these laws, when usually what they would be required to show is like, okay, here are poll watchers acting badly, and here's the connection to the law and why it should be enjoined. But and also there's offensive litigation. You know, we've gone to court to protect the rights that state law, which again, varies by jurisdiction, but protect the rights of poll watchers to give them the full rights of access to early voting sites, polling places, ability to effectively monitor the process.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
I
for
think,
that.
were you
Yeah,
going
go
to
ahead.
add to that, Christina?
I was just going to say that in nearly every state that I've been involved in, the code does permit for access for poll watchers. And that's something that we have been tracking really closely to ensure that if there is an event where one of our observers are denied access or kicked out of the precinct, which we all have heard those stories happen before, the RNC is committed to being on the front lines and ensuring that those poll watchers are given access and allowed back into the polling sites. We have a record of achieving that. And then we also, as Steve mentioned, the RNC has a record of going to court and fighting for poll watcher rights. So this is something that is paramount and of a top priority for the RNC.
Well, I think we could end up going a whole nother hour on all these questions. I mean, I think we're going to have to invite you guys back as time goes on after our primary. But you have been absolutely off the charts fabulous, both of you. The information has just been incredible. I just can't thank you enough. And I look at someone like Donna, who's been answering questions, as Kathy Hagler has been answering questions. You know, Donna did the war room, so she knows firsthand.
Good.
Lisa was there helping her in Austin. So, and I know we had other ones, so we know the importance of all this, everything you shared today. So my challenge to all of you is that I say to you, get, volunteer. First go, to your county chair, or go into the elections administrator, develop the relationship. And if that doesn't work, I want you to sign up next week when that new site comes out, and then we'll be able to direct you. So, and I will be putting that information out and asking TFRW and TRCCA also to share it. So we are going to be there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. But Christina and Steve, wow, you guys were awesome. And we just can't thank you enough for taking your time to be with us and educate us and answering the few questions we got to, and maybe there'll be another time. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me.
Thank you for everyone for joining this morning and for, continuing to fight the good fight in Texas, and looking forward to a fantastic election cycle ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Christina. Awesome.